Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Let me speak to you of love. Love is a great mystery. Love can take many forms. There's the romantic kind of love, the love of one's family, the love of one's country, and then there's the love you bear for a good VPN, and that's where Surfshark comes in. I love the secure encryption that keeps me safe from online snoopers. I love the way it enables me to access streaming services and websites not available in my home country by changing my virtual location. And of course, I love the way I can use it on an unlimited number of devices. Yes, there's a lot to love about Surfshark. Why not get it for yourself and feel the love? Feel it? I mean, you don't have to, but if you click the link in the description below and enter the code JAGO, you can get 83% off a 2-year plan, plus 3 months extra free. It also comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, let's get on with the video, and know that I love you. Before I begin, I'd like to apologise for my voice, which might well be a little bit off. I was quite ill when I was recording this. That being said, let's get on with it. This is the grave of Sir John Fowler at Brompton Cemetery. Fowler was a railway engineer who had the unusual distinction of being a man whose ghost predeceased him, so to speak. Let's look at the brief and ignominious history of Fowler's ghost. In a shocking twist, Fowler's ghost was not some restless spirit, but a steam locomotive, an experimental engine designed specifically for the Underground, or the Metropolitan Railway as it was back then. This is the only known photograph of the engine, so you're probably going to be seeing it more than once in this video. John Fowler was one of the most highly regarded engineers of the 19th century. He still is, actually. His obituary stated that he was in the forefront of the struggle in subduing the great powers of nature to the service of man, and wherever the difficulties were greatest, he was certain to be found. I mean, I probably wouldn't put it like that, but he was pretty good at his job. His career spanned over 60 years, and he made his name in railways and bridges. In fact, one of his most famous works is the Forth Railway Bridge in Scotland. He worked on numerous railways beginning in 1837. Some of the more notable ones include the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincoln, and the London and Brighton. Grosvenor Bridge and Victoria Station, both in London, are his work. So too is the Dollis Brook Viaduct in North London. In 1844 he became a consulting engineer with his own practice and was kept on hand by the Great Western Railway after the death of Isambard Kingdom Brunel in 1859. In 1866 he became the youngest president of the Institute of Civil Engineers. But that's skipping ahead. As well as the Forth Bridge, he has another railway icon to his name, the London Underground, no less. Fowler was a man whose engineering was, I would say, just unconventional enough. A safe pair of hands, but also capable of coming up with unconventional solutions. He was therefore just the man needed for the Metropolitan Railway. The Metropolitan Railway was the first underground railway in the world. It's where we get the term metro, in fact. It originally ran from Farringdon to Paddington, a short distance, but one that presented plenty of challenges. It was a railway through an urban environment. It would incorporate tight curves and short distances between stations. It was built using a method known as cut and cover. The railway would be built in a trench, then the trench would be covered over to form tunnels. Edward Watkin, who would become chairman of the Metropolitan Railway, complained that per mile no engineer was ever paid so highly, which is a little unfair because most engineers didn't have to deal with the kind of challenges the Underground brought. One of the biggest was ventilation. In the 1860s, the only practical way to power such a railway was by steam. And in a railway that was underground, that was an issue. There were ways to minimise the problem. One was openings in the tunnel roof. Another was for the engines to burn coke rather than coal, which was smokeless. But Fowler had another idea. He designed an entirely new type of engine, which was built in secret by Robert Stephenson and Co. in 1861. The engine looked, from the outside, like a normal locomotive. The tracks of the Metropolitan Railway were built to the broad gauge of 7 feet and 1/4 inch, and so the engine was designed to run on those rails. It was a 240, i.e. 2 wheels at the front for support, 4 wheels to power it, plus a 4-wheeled tender to carry the fuel. But it was inside that things got interesting. Well, interesting if you like steam trains, anyway. In a conventional engine, the heated gases from the fire are carried in tubes through the boiler, where they heat the water to produce steam. This engine was different. Between the firebox and the boiler was something called a combustion chamber filled with fire bricks. The idea was that when the engine was being used in the open air, say when it was idling at a station under a ventilation shaft, the engine would make steam in the conventional way, as well as heating the fire bricks. Then, when it entered the tunnel, the crew could close the fire off, and the fire bricks would do the heating. The engine also incorporated condensers, which is a fancy way of saying pipes that could catch exhaust steam, condense it, and discharge it back into the boiler. Between the combustion chamber and the condensers, the engine should have produced little to no exhaust in the tunnels. It was, in theory at least, a revolutionary idea. But due to the secrecy surrounding it, few would know anything about it, and it would later acquire the nickname of Fowler's Ghost. The engine was tested, again in secret, on the Great Western Main Line out of Paddington, and it was during this test, near Hanwell in West London, that a problem came to light. Quite a serious problem, actually. The feed pump jammed. The feed pump is what lets water into the boiler. The fireman is in charge of it, and it's a very important piece of equipment. Let the boiler go dry while the fire is burning, and you risk an explosion. Now, of course, equipment failure is a possibility, and there's usually a second line of defence if your boiler is going dry, to drop the fire. This is exactly what it sounds like: drop the fire out of the firebox onto the track. So you might have already figured out the issue here. When the heat source is a chamber full of bricks built into the very structure of the locomotive, dropping the fire isn't going to do much. Apparently no one thought of this when designing or building the engine. Fortunately, the engine did not explode. Perhaps the firemen fixed the pump, or perhaps they were just lucky. It's not recorded. Fowler went back to the drawing board and came up with a new version that included a water tank above the boiler that could take care of the problem of low water more directly. But by this time it was clear that the Ghost was not only dangerous when it went wrong, but it didn't work very well when it went right. The combustion chamber meant that the Ghost had about half as much space in its boiler for actually producing steam as a conventional engine. The Ghost was busted. When the Metropolitan Railway finally opened, it used more conventional locomotives built specifically for the job by the Great Western Railway, then hastily adapted ones loaned from the Great Northern Railway. In 1864 they bought their own, to Fowler's specifications. The Ghost was a minor blip in Fowler's otherwise successful career. He would continue to work on underground projects, including putting forward the recommendation for the Circle Line, and eventually he acted as a consultant on some of the first deep-level tube lines, the City and South London Railway and the Central London Railway. He passed away on the 20th of November, 1898. As for the Ghost itself, well, it was laid up out of the way in Hammersmith in 1865 before being sold to Isaac Bolton. Bolton ran a locomotive hire firm that specialised in buying obsolete engines and Frankensteining them into something more useful. Unfortunately, the Ghost proved beyond his abilities, and in 1894 it was sold to the locomotive builders Bayer Peacock, who, coincidentally, had built the Metropolitan Railway's first successful engines. Bayer Peacock didn't know what to do with it either, and it was cut up. Exactly when is unknown, but it seems that the Ghost had finally been laid to rest. Well, I hope you enjoyed this spectral tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. As always, you are the firebricks to my boiler. I'd also like to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below to take advantage of their generous offer. and I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.